Hello, and thanks for tuning into my YouTube channel. My name is Nikki, and today I'm going to be doing my spring reading wrap-up. I'm using spring in a very loose way. It's basically all the books I've read since my last January-February reading wrap-up. Over the course of March, April, and May, I read 20 books. 4 out of those 20 were audiobooks. 4 out of those 20 were also nonfiction, and then 2 out of those 20 were translated works. So I have a lot to get through. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna start talking about books. First off is Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. This book follows our main character Ada, chronicling her coming of age with a divided sense of self through this really amazing, unique prose that almost relentless, reading it almost makes you feel like you're gasping for air. This book explores trauma and mental health and spirituality in a really unique way that I haven't seen done before. Next book that I read was called Blessings by Chukwuebuka Ibe. This is a book by a Nigerian author and also a coming of age story, and it follows our main character Obefuna as he is growing up in Nigeria during a time of a lot of political unrest. He actually gets found out by his really strict homophobic father for having a little crush on another boy and gets sent to a boarding school. At the boarding school, there's this really strict, brutal social hierarchy that really rewards shows of masculinity and honestly cruelty towards students that are deemed weak or outside of the status quo in this very patriarchal society. We follow Obefuna growing up in this boarding school, and then later in life as he has graduated from school and is attending university, we can see the political landscape in Nigeria and the criminalizing of having gay relationships and how that kind of mirrors the environment of the school that he grew up in. There's some really heart-wrenching moments in this book, especially between Obefuna and his mother, who you can tell there's a lot of deep love between them. She really sees him and accepts him, but just doesn't see in the current state of things how he can thrive. The next book I read was My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. This book has a pretty large cult following on the internet and in general. It basically is about this woman who seems to have it all from the outside. She's rich, she's white and beautiful. She's got an apartment all paid off in New York. Despite all of that, she's just deeply unfulfilled in her life, and she decides to partake in a year of pill and medication-induced hibernation. A very dark satire. If you are into that type of humor, you're definitely gonna find it entertaining. I specifically found the characters of Dr. Tuttle, who is our main character's psychologist and the one who is kind of irresponsibly prescribing her all of these pills, as well as the main character's best friend Reba, to just be examples of characters that really jump off of the page and really eccentric and entertaining. Next, we're gonna get into some audiobooks. I kind of rediscovered my enjoyment in audiobooks, specifically nonfiction audiobooks. The first audiobook I'm gonna talk about is called Pulling the Chariot of the Sun by Shane McCrae. This is a memoir of Shane's childhood, and he was the victim of familial kidnapping. Shane McCrae's father is black and mother is white, and as a child Shane was kidnapped by his white grandparents. This memoir uses a pretty unconventional structure compared to other memoirs that I've read. Shane is kind of piecing together all of these really fragmented memories he has from his childhood because of the trauma he endured. There's just a lot of like gaps in his memory, and almost like stream of consciousness style of writing really like reflects that. The next audiobook I listened to, I had actually started a while ago on the recommendation from my friend Anju, and I just came back to it recently. The Other Significant Others, Reimagining Life with Friendship at the Center by Raina Cohen. This book basically explores unconventional styles of partnership. That is, partnership that doesn't center around romantic, monogamous relationships. It uses a lot of different examples, like real life stories, whether it's like two friends living with each other, or, you know, neighbors who decide to move in after one of them has a child to share the labor. I really appreciated how Raina Cohen talks not only about like the benefits of choosing to live your life this way, but also discusses like the different conflicts that these families or people have encountered. Also at the end, Raina Cohen goes into like some of the legal limitations and how we can maybe make it easier for people to pursue platonic partnerships. I thought this was like a really well-rounded dissection of a topic I'm interested in. The next book that I read was called Dykette by Jenny Fran Davis. This is told from the perspective of Sasha, who is on this holiday trip with her partner, and they're being hosted by an older lesbian couple at their house in upstate New York. There's a lot of like drama that ensues, and it also really like goes into butch femme dynamics in relationships, really interrogating like desirability and jealousy. I definitely enjoyed this, but it kind of like lost me in the third part. I felt like the main character was just being kind of whiny, and it was getting on my nerves. I did really love this. This was Hunchback by Sao Ichikawa, translated by Polly Barton. This is a really short book. The main character is named Shaka, and she is a disabled woman living in Japan. She lives in a nursing home that was kind of like left to her by her parents. She's also a writer, most notably of like erotic stories online, and also kind of like edgy tweets about disability and sexuality. Loved this book. I really enjoyed the discussions about sexuality and also autonomy. The next book that I read was called Gun Love by Jennifer Clement. This book is about the main character, Pearl, who's a young girl living with her mother in a car in a trailer park. And there's this kind of shady pastor who also lives at the trailer park, who starts a kind of like under the table gun buyback program. And this in turn invites a lot of gun violence into their small community. This book I had kind of like mixed feelings on. It kind of like split off from that setting. I overall found it interesting, but in the end kind of shallow. I listened to the third Warrior Cats installment called Forest of Secrets. It was really fun as an audiobook. The narrator kind of like did different voices for all the characters, so it made it like really engaging, even though I found pretty much like the first half of this boring and like we were going in circles. But then at the end, shit really went down, and I was kind of impressed by like these interesting philosophical questions that it was asking. It's usually pretty young readers. Kashi is biting my ankles as I talk. Oh, she wants lunch. Let me go give her lunch and I'll be back. The Possession, and this is written by Annie Arnaud, translated from French by Anna Moschavakis. This is the first book I've read by Annie Arnaud, although she's like a very beloved French author. It's a really short memoir about Annie Arnaud in the aftermath of having an affair with a married man. Really brutally honest about the nasty parts of human nature and how jealousy kind of like brings those out in you. After I read this, I watched the movie Possession, which is not related to Annie Arnaud's memoir at all, other than they do explore similar things thematically. What Arnaud explores through like humor and like contemplation. Possession, the film, explores those things through like horror, and I'll leave it at that. This is Disability Intimacy, Essays on Love, Care, and Desire, edited by Alice Wong. It's been on my shelf for a while, and I finally got around to it in the form of listening to the audiobook. This is Alice Wong's second anthology. Her first one is called Disability Visibility. I was expecting this to talk mostly about like sexual intimacy, but it also talks about like access intimacy. Really appreciated like the breadth of topics covered in this book. Fortune Favors the Dead by Stephen Spotswood. This was a really fun buddy read I did with my friend Susan. It takes place in the 1940s, so it kind of has that like film noir, like vintage detective novel appeal. It's told from the perspective of Willow Jean Parker, aka Will, who is this like really dynamic, captivating main character who like ran away from the circus to become an apprentice to this like renowned badass female detective named Detective Pentecost. It was a really fun read. I haven't really like ventured into the world of mystery novels, but I feel like they're kind of having a moment right now. I enjoyed like all of the like gay elements in this one, and also that it wasn't like really gratuitous with the like violence and the crime aspect of it. The next book I read was Good Girl by Aria Aber. I like recently went on a trip to Berlin, and prior to the trip I wanted to see if I had any books on my TBR that took place in Berlin, and this book does. The main character is named Nyla, going through the like rave scene in Berlin. There's a lot of like drugs, sex, and alcohol. She starts this like romantic relationship with an older artist named Marlowe. Yeah, I kind of went into this expecting it to be kind of like a party novel, but it actually has some like really interesting insights into xenophobia and class divide happening in Berlin. She was frustrating to me as a reader at times because she really wanted to like align herself to whiteness and distance herself from her like Arab background. In the end, you just like really feel for her because she's young and figuring life out. You can't really like blame her for the way that she feels, but you want the best for her. There's another character named Elias who Nyla has a friendship with, and I thought they had some like really beautiful moments of understanding. Now we're getting into the books that I read while I was on vacation. Rosarita by Anita Desai. This book follows a main character named Bonita who is pursuing linguistic classes in Mexico, and while she's there she meets this kind of like mysterious stranger who claims to know Bonita's mother, and also claims that Bonita's mother was an artist who came to the same town in Mexico to study when she was younger. To our main character's knowledge, her mother was like never an artist, never went to Mexico. She's kind of like piecing together parts of her mom's past that she didn't know about and might not even be true. I thought the premise of this book sounded super interesting to me, but when I read it, it just left me wanting more. I mean, it's a really short book. I feel like it could have been longer. The next book I read on vacation was Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Shout out to Half Price Books. I found this really beautiful edition of it. I'm glad I finally got around to reading it because I loved it. If you're not familiar, this book follows our main character, Janie, and she's kind of like understanding her place in the world as well as like developing her own sense of self through the story of her 3 marriages that she's had throughout her life. One thing that this book is really well known for is how Hurston writes the dialogue, like it's written in dialect. I found the banter and like the flirting and jokes between characters to just be like some of the most natural examples of dialogue I've seen written. Even though it's like a fairly short book, manages to like effectively touch on a lot of complicated topics like colorism and like Black women's autonomy during, I think this takes place in like the 40s or 30s in Florida. Open Throat by Henry Hoke. This is a very experimental novel written from the perspective of a mountain lion who is living under the Hollywood sign in LA. I described this as a book for kids who grew up reading Warrior Cats and are now gay and existential. I really enjoyed the commentary on human nature. It explores the relationships between humans and animals as they are driven together more and more, largely due to climate change and habitat destruction. This is Hagstone by Sinead Gleason, a artist named Nell who's living on a really remote island in Ireland. Also on this island, there's this reclusive convent who is often in the news because people speculate that they might be a cult. The convent actually commissions Nell to create a historical record of their group and their activities. This is a very atmospheric novel. I thought the descriptions of the island itself were so vivid to the point that the island felt like its own character. The only thing I didn't love was there were these two men that Nell gets romantically / sexually involved with, and I kind of felt that was a waste of our time. I kind of wish the author had spent her time talking more about the Inyons, who are the women who live at the convent. Also, an interesting thing I found when I was reading the acknowledgments in the back was how much research Sinead Gleason put into developing Nell's fictional artistic portfolio. I thought that was really thoughtfully done. Only 3 more books left to go. This is Gunk by Sava Sams. This is about our main character Jules, who all her life has felt really called to motherhood and becoming a parent, and it just wasn't in the cards for her. And then Jules enters this kind of unconventional pregnancy and arrangement with a younger woman named Nim. This book explores non-sexual intimacy. I thought it actually paired really well with my earlier reading of The Other Significant Others, Dolores by Lauren Amy Curtis. This book is about a young girl named Dolores who seeks refuge in a convent after discovering that she's pregnant. I read this in one sitting and enjoyed the experience, but felt I needed more. I was a little unsatisfied at the end. Okay, last book. This is Cool for You by Eileen Myles. Although this is a novel, it's an example of autofiction, as Eileen Myles draws heavily from their own childhood growing up in the Boston area, working class Irish Catholic family. A portrait of all the different institutions within theirs and their family's life. Specifically, their grandmother on their father's side, who was institutionalized in a mental hospital in Massachusetts for a lot of, I think, most of her life until her death. Those state hospitals and mental hospitals institutions are a large part of Massachusetts history that often goes uninterrogated and overlooked. I thought the discussions about them in this novel were really interesting, and I would be interested in reading some of their other works, maybe even some of their poems. That was a lot of talking for me to do as I'm recovering from a cold, but I've just been sitting at home and I'm what better time to record this long ass video than right now. Let me know if you've read anything good recently, or if you have read any of the books that I mentioned and you have your own thoughts to share. Until next time, see ya.